Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Decrypting IT. I'm your host, Ashley Wallace, Client Success Lead here at Catalyst Network Group. Today's episode is diving into the real-world challenges of network segmentation in OT environments and why flat networks are leaving critical infrastructure exposed. We're breaking down the key misconceptions around IT-OT convergence, exploring why segmentation still lags in high-risk industries, and offering some practical steps that your organization can take to close those gaps. Joining us to unpack all of this is Rich Springer. He's the Senior Director of Product Marketing for OT Solutions at Fortinet. There, Rich leads efforts to promote cybersecurity strategies for industrial and converged IT-OT environments. So thanks for joining us today, Rich. With your wealth of background, we're super excited to have you on with us and talking about this today.
Thanks, Ashley. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to field your questions and help our audience.
Great. Let's dive right in and
Yeah.
just let's talk about what is the difference between IT and OT networks. We're going to start off with some basics.
Yeah, sure. The first comes with the priorities of each. IT networks are looking at day-to-day business processes, right? I mean, this could be your email, this could be those, the specific in home built apps and what have you inside your industry. But it's looking again at that day-to-day business continuity, focusing on data. OT networks, completely different. It starts with safety. Right? I mean, you don't typically, from a day-to-day cube life, we're not thinking about safety as a priority, but it is the number one priority in the operational space, right? Starting with people and then with the personnel, the processes and all of the machinery that goes with that. So safety is the number one priority in that space. And from that, we get into the operational space and we're looking at reliability and efficiencies and resiliency and how are we continuing to keep the lights on, produce our products and be as efficient as possible. And that leads to profitability for the company as well. So completely different set of priorities from the get-go. Then also will lead into kind of how our networks are constructed, both in the IT side and the OT side. And we'll expand upon that probably here in a little bit. But those are the fundamental differences, our priorities between the two.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. I think it's good just to kind of have a refresher on that as we move into the conversation before we get started too deep. What do you think that some of, I guess, the biggest misconception is that people have about OT networks that you're seeing on your side?
Yeah, misconceptions, they start with what some folks on the OT side will tell you is that, well, our networks are air gapped. We're not connected. So we don't really need cybersecurity. We're going to focus on operations. Thank you very much. That is an old answer and doesn't reflect the modern day, right? I mean, if we know as our digital footprint and our devices are, any humans walking into those spaces, that you're basically indirectly connected. So we've kind of gotten over that hurdle. But once we start engaging on the cyber journey, there's some assumptions made that the operational reliability of the utilities or the factories, that also includes cybersecurity. And it's absolutely not true. These systems that were built, these automated systems and so forth, they were built in order to have production bases, right? Back to those priorities. And they're super safe, super reliable, but they can also be really old. And they're so reliable that they could be 20, 30, even sometimes beyond that old. And this is at a time when before the internet was even really come to form.
Yeah.
So they weren't built for the sake of modern exposure to the internet and cybersecurity practices. So one of the misconceptions is that, because my factory runs so operationally efficient, is that it all must have security, and it's not. The second part of this too is that there are a lot of assumptions that, either federally or state or local, or there's some type of regulation in place that is driving cybersecurity. I mean, we need to be able to have clean water. We need to have reliable electricity. We need to have our supply chain protected in a cyber sense. And that's also, with very few exceptions, also not true. So that burden really comes to individual organizations or agencies to make individual decisions in order to really invest in and build out robust cybersecurity practices in the OT space. So those are, two of the kind of the biggest misconceptions coming into trying to secure OT infrastructure.
Those are great. I mean, I think what I've seen or heard maybe briefly or various different times has been that separating IT and OT networks is a form of segmentation. Would you agree with that or explain where you see that falls short? I think you kind of identified that already with just the lack of security in the OT space in general.
Yeah. Yeah, segmentation really begins when we start to connect those two networks. So segmentation refers to using modern cybersecurity devices. And from my standpoint, this is what we call the FortiGate next generation firewall. And so it is separating the traffic between IT and OT and evaluating it both from an IT standpoint and OT standpoint. So it's your first gate to the castle, if you will. And that is also providing the connection between the two, IT and OT. So segmentation continues on from that. You can use additional firewalls to then segment out your network based on your process lines or remote sites. And then you get into using switches in order to further segment. And then you'll get down to the actual devices. So if I use an illustration as that OT typically today is kind of that pole barn, right? You open up the doors and you just have access to everything. Modern segmentation techniques is that we build what they call zones and conduits, but we build hallways and doors in order to
Mhm.
prevent anybody coming to that space to make it difficult or impossible to move in amongst that. So as I walk in that barn and I open the first door, I may actually need to get in the far corner, but I've got to go through so many different ways in order to get there that it becomes too difficult. And for the bad actors, they do not want to waste time, right? They are trying to get, they're trying to be as effective as quick as possible. So that's a great way to keep the bad actors out. So segmentation really goes all the way down to that conveyor belt and those PLCs or those small computers running that, is that we can, make it very difficult for bad actors to get to that space where they can actually affect harm or interrupt production.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
So are you finding that then that often the OT networks often remain unsegmented today?
It's not that they remain as much as that that's just where they are. The OT and the reality is, and this is globally, and this is largely across all verticals in OT, whether it be on the civilian side or the government side, is that again, they were built for operational reliability. And with that, they were very open or flat. So as we walk into scenarios with our customers, that is just what they're inheriting. And not only inheriting this, but they also may have acquired numerous different factories along the way. So not only do they have one problem, but they've got 10 different problems. So for us to come in, we're approaching this from being a trusted OT advisor in order to talk about best practices and also standardization and talk about a security policy. And then how do we effectively measure all of this? And how do we then help translate the mitigation of OT risk to an ROI conversation? So there's a lot going on there, but it really does start with that segmentation piece of it. And that is some of the biggest benefit too, is that where you had nothing before, a flat network, you bring in the segmentation, secure remote access, network access control, some of these other basic things that the IT folks are very aware of. That has a tremendous impact initially as far as improving the cyber hygiene and maturity.
Okay, great. Yeah, we just ran our annual cybersecurity report as well,
Mhm.
and some of our findings were that 63% of clients had flat networks or minimal VLAN segmentation. So I'm sure that probably doesn't surprise you too much, does it?
Does not at all. And actually, it's encouraging. It's only 63%. So, um, yeah, that's just a true reality of where we are. But there is, there, people are investing. I mean, companies are investing. We're seeing real movement and growth. So I anticipate, next time you run the survey, that number is coming down rapidly, right?
Good.
So it's not all doom and gloom out there, and action's being taken, and we're seeing really good results.
Good. Yeah, it's good to know that. I think that just continuing to increase the awareness of that should also assist in getting that number to come down.
Yes.
What risk does it pose when you're seeing them still run in that flat space? We sort of covered that already, but go into a little bit more on what the risks are.
So maybe if I step back, I can talk about kind of two different distinct risks to OT infrastructure or OT industry. We're pretty familiar with ransomware, right? These are bad actors that are typically entering into the IT space. And unfortunately, what they have realized is that those IT networks that are connected to OT resources, that there is more at stake. And That meaning that they now are aware that, well, this factory produces this product every hour. And if I interrupt that, now there's more emphasis, and that means more risk, and that means more ransom for me, right? So without that segmentation, the bad actors are able to get into the IT network, traverse into the OT network, go into that pole barn, and then they realize, look at all these factory lines and look at all these devices. And so I
Yep.
can, then really ransom the factory. And this can be indirect or direct. Sometimes there are departments or services on the IT side that have significant impact in the operations in the OT side. So there's two different ways of going about that. This is the most common form in the near term, piece of it. And we see this through numerous other reports, as well as that manufacturing, unfortunately, is the biggest target. The other part of this is nation state type of activity or hacktivists or what have you. They are, one, they're government or military backed, and with this, they have the resources in order to spend the time to go after OT networks and devices themselves. And when I say that, is that the OT devices are operating off of a different communication system, and so generic types of malware are not going to work in that space, or as effectively work at that OT device level. So they have to invest in this. And the reason that they're doing this is a couple different reasons. We see a lot of activities, wars, if you will, geopolitical activities going on, and they're attacking aspects of infrastructure. We also see these nation states also preparing the battlefield. And so they're gaining access, they're surveilling, they're looking at data and just kind of waiting for something to happen. The other part is that those same types of techniques then turn back to industry, because industry and the whole part holistically is part of the supply chain of our government and our military.
Yep.
There can be both of those things going on at the same time. The ransomware piece of it is very near term. It's get in, get out, and all of a sudden my network is being encrypted. The other one is much more subtle and could be laying and waiting until something goes on, either a geopolitical or even just an illustration of their capability. And we've seen this largely in infrastructure, some recent events that have gone on there as well.
And you said
So
more so in manufacturing. Why do you think manufacturing is targeted more so? Is that just because of the operational downtime and the risks that are posed cost-wise
absolutely.
there?
Yep. The monetization of production loss and interruption is an added variable to their ransom. So it's a bonus, unfortunately.
Yep.
And again, if I go back to some of the misconceptions of OT, it's up to individual companies and manufacturing in order to, build a proper security program. There isn't anything that's forcing them to do so. So it's their
Like
own.
standards and government
I
standards
mean,
or
yeah,
regulations.
yeah. I mean, it's up to individual companies, public or private, in order to make that risk assessment and where it falls out on their risk register and
Yeah.
how that gets properly funded and executed.
I wonder if that's also why there's a higher amount of the flat networks and people not. I mean, I guess you said that's changing, but maybe that's there's not as much incentive when there's not a regulation behind it, right? To change it in some cases. I can imagine that could still be the case. Would you agree
Yeah.
with that? Or
Yeah. So this is, again, it's very encouraging. And over the last, I'll say let's just say 3 years. It's changed rapidly in the last 3 years. If I go back to the comments of like being air gapped, or it's not, why would they come after us? Right. So there was a
Mhm.
healthy amount of denial in the OT space, and that has changed rapidly. And it's
Good.
a lot of it is because of the exposure and frequency and the impact of what these direct or indirect attacks on OT networks have. Right. So that's where that risk evaluation has ratcheted up to the point where OT risk is now in the top of the risk register. And what that means is that the boardroom or the C-suite is then saying, okay, we have a new number 5 on the list. Who's going to own this? And they turn to likely the CISO, or it could be the COO or the CTO. And we know, and through a survey that we run on the Fortinet side, we just came out with this, the 2025 State of Operational Technology and Cybersecurity report, is that for 4 years running now, the CISO has increased in responsibility with OT. And amongst all of the C-suite, it's upwards of now 90. That, like I said, I talked about 3 years, but this is the 4 years of evolution or elevation of risk, and then the solutions follow that.
Right.
So it is
Good to
happening.
know. Good to
Yeah.
know.
So the denial, we're exiting denial, which is very healthy. We're embracing it, and then again to have have the C-suite of the board as a top priority means a lot, because before it was likely left to a plant manager or a SCADA engineer to like go off and do something with cybersecurity. And like, well, I need to spend some money. Well, yeah, we don't really have money. Just go off and figure it out. Now,
Not the
fast forward
priority.
3 years later, now you have the CISO, now you have the IT teams, you have a healthy budget, you have best practices from a security to help consult, and then you're coming into the OT space, and now you have IT and OT teams coming together as combined resources. And we're figuring it out between OT and IT and OT teams, going back to those priorities and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, both teams are motivated to keep the lights on, keep the product flowing, and keeping society safe.
Good. Good. I'm glad to hear that it's improving.
Yeah,
We're stepping in the right direction.
absolutely.
So great.
Absolutely.
What do you think if you're one of those customers who doesn't have, you need to improve segmentation, not really sure what maybe next steps look like. What are some quick wins for improving segmentation?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you go back to some of the devices, again, if your devices are old, there are numerous network security devices. And again, FortiGate, this is our business. So there's a immediate capability of upgrading, right? And that's just a near-term tactical thing. What I would do is make sure that we're thinking strategically at the same. There's a lot going on in this space, and there's a lot to do. And so this goes to be how efficient, both from a budget standpoint and then from an operational standpoint, can we roll out these solutions and not upset operations, but augment them? And so that takes we like to position ourselves as the OT trusted advisor, right? I mean, we've been in OT for 20 years. We have the largest install base in the globe, and we cover all verticals. So we really do have a tremendous bench strength. So from our standpoint, it doesn't matter whether you're electrical utility or a water, wastewater management, or you're, the cutting edge of manufacturing, like we've seen it, right? And not only that, but we have an OT security platform that will take you from basic solutions to the most advanced solutions, including an OT security operations center. We can do assessments along the way and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, we're with you as far as that cyber journey. So yes, it starts with that segmentation. There's some immediate steps, but I would just implore the audience to think strategically about what does that OT SOC look like, right? Or what does that IT OT SOC look like? Just make sure that we're making those considerations, so we're not taking on too much and then drowning in the data, and the real critical alerts are getting drowning in the noise of all this rapid adoption of these cybersecurity solutions.
Yeah, that's great. Those are good next steps. I think we can get lost when we don't, when there's so much that needs to be done. It can get to a point where you become frozen, so to
Yeah,
speak. So I think
yeah.
having a really good partner to work with is key. Appreciate that. The next thing I was going to ask you was, are there questions that you wish your clients would ask more when it comes to IT OT? Do you think that there are questions that are not being asked that they should explore?
Yeah, I think, and again, it goes with progression. So as we talked about the segmentation at the basic level, connecting IT and OT networks, that's a very mainstream conversation, and it's a very IT conversation. I mean, you're taking two corporate networks and you're connecting them, right? Where you need to get deeper is as you start moving down into the OT network, you start getting into unique communication traffic. And these are driven by OT protocols. So these robot arms are talking a different language to the conveyor belt and back and forth. And so that's where, yes, you can start with that first firewall to connect them, but
Mhm.
you need to have OT specific solutions as you get down deeper. Now, once you get down deeper into the OT world and OT devices, the other aha moment here is that that it will be mentioned that like, well, we haven't patched anything for months or years. And that is also one of the biggest misconceptions. In the IT world, it's patch Tuesday. In the OT world, it's patch maybe and often patch never. And it's not due to negligence. It's due to the operational necessity. We don't have a maintenance window for 6 months, or going back to the age of these devices is that vendor may be out of business, or they're not able to produce a patch at all, or that it's going to take them a significant amount of time. So there
Wow.
are legitimate limitations when you get down to that space. And so some of the thing that needs to be asked is that work all the way down to that OT device layer. And with that, there's a lot of shortcomings there, and this patching use case is very, very difficult. But there are also other things we can do as far as compensating controls in order to mitigate risk around those key devices. And we talked segmentation, but we can even go to micro segmentation, so making it even more finite as far as how we're communicating back and forth with that device. We can do things like virtual patching, where we can use those network devices in order to shield that device. So if
Mhm.
something bad is coming down the traffic lane, we can actually block it at that level and to act like the patch. Yeah, the other things we can do are like deception. So we can make fake devices and the communication pathways. So if a bad actor gets in there and they're like, oh, look at these 10 vulnerable devices, I'm going to click on one of those, that sends immediate alarms to the operations center. And then we can do automated actions to actually kick out that bad actor.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, and even more advanced is network behavioral analysis and monitoring. So this is an advanced, and it's called 40 NDR, and there are many out there, but what it speaks OT. So what's unique about the OT space is that it's typically very kind of batch oriented, so stable. Whereas in the IT world, you've got data and people and applications flying around everywhere. So to be able to put a solution like this in place in OT, and if you have really sophisticated actors, they can be moving around or they can be extracting data. But that type of solution is looking at the network and baselining it. So it's
Okay.
expecting I've got this level of operation, and whether that's hour to hour, day to day, but it's mapping that out. So when I start seeing spikes going on because something
Yep.
is nefarious going on, now it's alerting on that. And that's all for the sake, again, for keeping that robot arm riveting the car chassis, right?
Yeah.
But what we're doing are building these kind of concentric moats around that vulnerable device until we can actually patch it properly.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Well, I know that you mentioned the Fortinet report. I can't remember the full name of it. Something along
Mhm.
with also a cybersecurity report.
Yeah.
What were some of the five best practices and maybe some next steps that we can take away from that report?
Yeah, yeah. So if anybody's writing it down, it's the Fortinet 2025 State of Operational Technology and Cybersecurity Report. And this has been a 7-year long survey, so there's great trending data in here as well. But from this, we continue to refine our 5 best practices, and again, this is from a very holistic view, but really leveraging our bench strength in OT. So number one, we talk about visibility. Visibility goes to, again, your network traffic, you leveraging those OT protocols, having OT based security solutions in order to see that traffic and then also to see those devices. That's visibility. And we do this through our FortiGate next generation firewall, our Forti switches, and various other solutions that can, compile this list. And then the second is segmentation, which we've been talking about, right? So those FortiGates and the Forti switches and the ability to do micro segmentation, that is all along those lines of segmentation. The other part about this that is really needs to be considered too is the adoption and the inclusion of OT threat intelligence. So there's the IT world, and again, we read about this, and this is what's near and present in our day-to-day livelihoods. But there's the whole other aspect of OT, and I mentioned nation-state level activity and also other unique vulnerabilities or even malware in that space. And so if you don't have that threat intelligence, and this comes through security services that are feeding back to those solutions, you're static today, right? The day you deploy those, if
Mhm.
they're not continually updated, then you are then vulnerable to the next days of activities or weeks or what have you. So there's got to be that feedback loop, and that's where these OT security services are vital. We talk also getting into making progressions toward an OT SOC. Again, this is sometimes often a strategic consideration, but with that, another best practice in here is adopting a platform approach. Now that a platform approach, you're not going to find one platform that's going to do this, but it's a vendor consolidation strategy and also efficiency, because we know that there are not enough cybersecurity professionals out there. That has been well documented, and the numbers are pretty astounding. It is worse so in OT. Again, with the having some operational background or being able to be knowledgeable down at that OT protocol device level, that's even exceptional, right? So this platform approach is not self-serving. It's really a means to be as efficient as possible from an operator standpoint, in a space where we know that that is going to be an increasing, unfortunately, deficit that we all have to deal with. So we've got some near-term things in there to do. We've got blocking and tackling, and then there's some strategic things, but this is all to follow along a pretty set maturity path that our IT friends would recognize. And in the OT space, we're busy hustling around trying to do the segmentation aspect of it. We need to also take time to see what the look over the horizon, and plan there. So we're being as efficient and quick to deploy as possible.
Sure, those are great next steps. I think we've got a good path for people to move forward with. Excuse me. And yeah, I think we appreciate the time and just the additional insight. I think this is definitely an area that deserves some additional attention and awareness. And so if we can continue to see a rise in that as well. So thanks for the time, Rich. We really appreciate you taking time to explain everything to us. We will be linking the reports here in this episode. So thanks for everyone for joining us today for this episode of Decrypting IT. And we'll talk with you soon.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Rich.
Ashley. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.